Hello and welcome to this video in which I'm going to go through an OCR CTEC IT Unit 1 paper. This one here is from January 2020. There are more recent ones, but this is the last one which is public on OCR's website, which means you can download it yourself and try it. The link to the paper and the mark scheme will be in the description. Hopefully the benefit of watching me go through it now, after you've tried it, ideally, is I'm going to talk about some exam technique, and I'm going to, having not seen the mark scheme, narrate my thoughts and try and make it as realistic as possible and try and give some advice along the way. Now this is probably a good time to plug the fact that I have got a set of videos which covers all of the content needed for Unit 1, and there is a lot of content, which you can tell from the very long playlist. I'll put a link in the description. Really important to prepare, you revise for this exam. You know, there are always people who think you can just wing exams and turn up and just know it magically. You can't. You need to put the hours in, revising, learning the content, learning the acronyms, understanding where stuff fits in the course to be able to do well in this exam. So just to point out a few things on this front page. First of all, this exam is an hour and a half. You might get more time if you are eligible for extra time. But that's a fairly short exam for level 3, which is sort of A-level equivalent. You can have a calculator. This will be useful for the maths questions. I mean, there's only really binary hexadecimal, which would come up, maybe units as well. You'll have these details hopefully going into the exam. Make sure you fill it in properly and use black ink. It's got to be black because the papers are scanned in and the examiner mark it will see a scanned version, and other colours don't show up well in the paper. Make sure you've got a couple of black pens, and also you can use pencils. Occasionally you've got to draw diagrams, so that's fine only for diagrams. Now this paper is worth 80 marks. So general exam technique is to spend about 1 minute per mark. So if it's a 1 mark question, spend a minute. If it's a 2 mark question, spend 2 minutes, roughly speaking. Some will be quicker, some will be slower, but overall try and pace yourself to about a minute a mark. And if you are worried about running out of time, you need to practice quite a few past papers and time yourself, and over time you'll get faster. If the real exam is the first time you've tried this paper, you don't know if you're going to run out of time or not, so please do practice it. But what I was trying to say was, you know, if it is a minute mark, that means you've got 10 minutes spare. Right, 1 hour 30 is 90 minutes and it's worth 80 marks. So you should have time to check at the end and go through all of your answers. Now, because this was a real paper, you're able to look at the grade boundaries to see what people got. To find these, all you do is Google Cambridge Technicals and the date. So I Googled Cambridge Technicals, January 2020. For other papers, you Google that year and month. So you've got to scroll down and find IT. There are other qualifications. So IT here, you can see there are 4 units which have exams. Unit 1 is called Fundamentals of IT, and you can see the grades here. So you've got distinction at the top, merit, pass, and R, weirdly, is near pass. So to pass, effectively, you get 1 of these 4. If you get below 16 out of 80, you fail it, which obviously is not good. So you've got to really make sure you get the R at the very least. But if you see, to get a distinction is 53 out of 80, which is about 65-66%, which is relatively low when you think that a distinction is about an A at A level. A merit is about a C, and that's about 50. I say about, that is exactly 50 according to this grade boundary. Then we've got about 35% for a pass and about 20% for a near pass. As you might know, grade boundaries do change. We can't really predict the grade boundaries ahead of time, but this is about what we're looking at for Unit 1. Okay, my final thing to say before we get going is just the structure of this paper, which hopefully you know about if you've tried these before, but if not, there are 2 sections, Section A and Section B. Section A is 15 marks, and it's multiple choice, where you get to just pick an option out of 4. So that should take you about 15 minutes. You don't want to spend too long on it. Section B is just a typical exam. You're writing the answer yourself. You're not given options to choose from. Marks will range usually between 1 and 10. So we'll do a couple of 10 markers later, I'm sure, and I'll talk through how to approach those. Right, let's start with section A then, with our multiple choice questions. Now, these are, people sometimes want to rush through this and expect it to be really easy. OCR really try and make these difficult. Okay, so you need to think about it carefully. You need to think about every answer they give, because they do, like I say, they're always trying to throw in a few distractors, answers which seem like they could be right, but are not quite right. So first of all, which wireless technology requires pairing? Bluetooth, laser, microwave, and Wi-Fi. Well, pairing, as you might know, is where you are connecting up something like a phone to Bluetooth. So the answer here is Bluetooth. Laser, microwave, not things we're going to use, but Wi-Fi, you're not pairing, you're putting in a password or just connecting. Question 2, when using troubleshooting tools, a log can help to record hardware faults, fix hardware faults, quarantine hardware faults, remove hardware faults. So, a log is a document, usually on my computer, which shows results or past actions. It's a long list of what's been going on the computer, essentially. So, it's not going to remove stuff. It doesn't actually do anything itself. It's just putting stuff on a page, on a screen. Quarantining is where you are trying to isolate a fault. Again, a log is very passive, and again, it won't fix stuff. So therefore, it will record hardware faults. That is the answer. Now, you could have got that just by seeing it as a first option, but also I eliminated it. That's good exam technique. Third question, which productivity software is the most appropriate for creating a mail merge letter template? Database, email, spreadsheet, word processor. Something like mail merge, is not on my specification, which is why I say OCR like to be a bit tricky. They're a bit dodgy at times, in my opinion. But mail merge is maybe not the key thing there. Letter is. Right, so which of these is going to make a letter? Database, email, spreadsheet, word processor. Not database, that's about tables. Email is not really a letter. Spreadsheet is definitely not a letter. So therefore, word processor would be used. So mail merge is where you are able to usually actually take data from a spreadsheet or from a database into something like a word processor. So if you get a letter at home, the office at your school is not sending 100 letters manually. They have the data in a table and they mail merge it into something like a word processor, which does it automatically. So if your thing is actually made in a word processor, the data is coming from something like a database or a spreadsheet. Moving on to question 4. Which business software is most suitable for creating a safety poster? CAD, CAM, MIS, DTP. So CAD and CAM are both for making things. CAD is for designing stuff like 3D things usually. CAM is for actually making it, so sort of 3D printing, that sort of thing. So a safety poster is sort of a 2D creation, so those two are out. MIS is very boring bit of software just to link together lots of different things used for businesses. They're not actually making stuff usually on MISs, so therefore it's, again, I'm pretty much doing these by elimination. It's got to be D, DTP. But hopefully you'd know that DTP is desktop publishing, and it's all about our slightly more creative tasks, which you're not writing stuff in DTP. It's more about the layout, things like magazines, posters, leaflets, business cards, that sort of stuff. Question 5. Which communication software enables several users to participate in a meeting over the phone? Messaging, personal assistance, teleconference, video conference. Okay, so maybe less obvious this one. Messaging, personal assistance. Well, personal assistants are things like Siri and Alexa, so that's not really relevant. They've got tools, but not, you don't call people through Alexa or Siri. You might be able to call somebody, but you're not going through Siri and Alexa, so it's not B. Messaging software, something like iMessage, WhatsApp, that's not usually to multiple people. It could be, but not often. You wouldn't have a meeting over WhatsApp, I suppose. Like WhatsApp, you could have a group chat, but it's not a meeting, so that rules out messaging. Now, between teleconference and video conference is where you've got a webcam and you are seeing their video. Teleconference is over the phone, so just an audio phone call. So because nothing is said about video calls, therefore teleconference is the safest option. because video conferencing is about video and it would save that in the question. So that one you've got to be a little bit clever about, because it's not immediately obvious which one it would be, but C is correct. Now 6. Which software troubleshooting tool tests computer performance against an established norm? Baseline, error logs, event logs, installable tools. Now this is hopefully just something you can recall. The answer is baseline. I'll just say that. What a baseline does is what it says here really. It will compare what things are like now against a previous time. So an established norm is something which you know your computer's meant to perform like this. Right now it's performing worse or better, and so the baseline compares it. Error logs, event logs are both logs which just record information. It's not really comparing anything. Installable tools are quite general. It could be loads of things, but baseline as an option would be what's correct. My ticks are getting worse as we're going through. Right, 7. Which of the following is an error reporting protocol? ICMP, FTP, HTTP, SMTP. Like many of these questions, it's just a case of learning. There are loads of protocols. It's not easy to learn them, but you've got to try to and do your best. Not so bad if it's only 1 mark, but if it came up in a 4 marker, a 6 marker, a 10 marker, would be a problem. So please do learn these as best you can. Learning the actual acronyms might be harder. So FTP, HTTP, nothing to do with errors, are application layer protocols which send stuff. So is SMTP. It sits right at the top of our stack. SMTP is for email, for sending email. So that leaves ICMP. ICMP, in our 4-layer model, we've got the application layer, we've got the transport layer, we've got the network layer, also called the internet layer, and we've got the link layer. So what ICMP does is sit at the network layer alongside IP. So IP is what gives us our IP addresses and makes sure stuff goes to the correct place. ICMP will report any errors which happen with IP addresses and things like that. It stands for Internet Control Message Protocol. The letter C for control might help you remember it's about reporting, but that's hard to remember, I do admit. Okay, question 8. A business stores its data offsite on computers run by another company. This is an example of client virtualization, cloud virtualization, server virtualization, or storage virtualization. Okay, so I've got to think myself there. Stores its data offsite on computer run by another company. So run by another company is the clue that this is going to be cloud virtualization, which you could argue is an example of storage virtualization. The fact that it's held somewhere else is what tells you it's cloud, right? The definition of cloud is it's held in an off-site location, which means away from where you are right now. Another company, held off-site as it says here, means it is cloud. Virtualization as a topic is probably the hardest one on the course, or you could definitely argue it is. It's all about things not being quite as they are, right? From your perspective, if you're using cloud storage, it looks like it's on your computer. It looks like it's perfectly fine. But cloud storage is held somewhere else. So that trickery is what makes it virtualization. Just to go through each one quickly. Client virtualization is where you are usually running multiple virtual machines on one computer. Each client is a full desktop computer. You might have one physical computer which is acting like it's 4. And you've got 4 clients. Each one is acting like it's its own computer. Server virtualization is exactly the same, just with little servers. Instead, you've got one server with, let's say in this case, 3 virtual servers. Each one acts like its own server, but running on one computer. Storage is sort of the opposite, actually. You've got usually multiple storage devices, but they act like they're part of one big storage device. So you might go to this PC and see one storage device shown, but in reality you've got several actually in the computer. So anyway, that's not relevant to cloud, but that's just going through them. It's a good habit to get into, trying to recall these because they are quite similar. Question 9. Which business system allows managers to organise and manage departments? So it's interesting here that it's written out these acronyms. Usually it keeps it in the acronym form. Here it hasn't. So Customer Relationship Management, which is shortened to CRM. Help Desk Management Information System, MIS. Pretty sure we had MIS already, didn't we? Somewhere? Yeah, which wasn't in written out form, interestingly. And SOP, Sales Ordering Process. So I'm sure this one had to write out because we've got 2 SOPs. We've also got SOP meaning Standard Operating Procedure. Probably why they had to write out the other ones as well. So going back to the question, allows managers to organise and manage departments. So that's an interesting one. I think let's eliminate it one by one. So CRM is about you really harvesting data about your clients and trying to target your clients to increase sales. So that's not really relevant. Help Desk is about helping people with issues with their computer. MIS is linking together lots of different things. So the organisation is interesting. And also, the word management is in this as well. And SOP is about just stuff getting bought. So I think we can pretty safely say the answer here is C. It links together lots of stuff. Organising and managing, I'm sure, is part of it as well. Now we're almost, no, we're not almost done. Question 10, which of the following methods allow participants to use body language to aid communication? Emails, group discussions, telephone, teleconferencing. Well, to use body language, you've got to be seen. And so that eliminates emails and telephones. The telephone on its own is just an audio call. Body language is non-verbal. So if we're just speaking, that's out. Right, you can't see my body language right now. So group discussions and teleconferencing we could. So no, teleconferencing, as I said before, is just audio. So no video in teleconferencing by default. Video conferencing would apply here. So therefore, group discussions is the answer. We're meeting in a group to talk about stuff. In person, you can see body language. And 11, which of the following does not demonstrate readiness to work through appearance? Appropriate clothing, can-do attitude, combed hair, use of deodorant. So what's appearance here? Clothing is, can-do attitude is not. So you can't tell by looking at somebody whether they're going to be really positive and are going to say yes to all the stuff, but you can tell the other stuff based on their appearance. Although deodorant, is a bit of kind of half and half, I suppose. But B is the most obvious one. Now, question 12. Which of the following is an ethical issue that businesses must consider? Disaster planning, health and safety, social engineering, or use of information? So, social engineering is about sort of a security issue. So it's not really ethical. Let's look at what the other ones are. Disaster planning, health and safety, about operational stuff. So sort of like day-to-day organisation. So it's not really ethical. Ethical stuff is about what's right and what's wrong. Use of information is more contentious, right? Some companies are really aggressive and want to get all of your data and harvest it and do loads of mining on it. Other companies are more ethical and do not want to do that. So I would definitely say here use of information is the answer. And also, if you look at the specification, this is under the ethical issue section. These ones aren't. So learning the specification is a really good revision technique as well. 13. Which of the following is attempting to gain unauthorized access to a computer system? Eavesdropping, hacking, interception, phishing. This is the sort of question which you should be able to do without even thinking, really. The answer is hacking. The other ones don't match this. Eavesdropping is just monitoring a network to intercept stuff. Interception is where you are trying to view packets, trying to steal packets when they're moving. And phishing are things like fake emails. 14. Which physical security method requires the user to have a key or a code? Fingerprint scan, iris scan, lock, or RFID? Well, a fingerprint scan, The whole point is you're not using a key or a code, you're using your fingerprint, so not that one. Iris scan, same reason, using your eye and not a physical object. A lock is physical, so I would definitely lean towards lock at this stage. But RFID, no. Again, the point of RFID is you're not using a key or a code. You're using things like an ID card, maybe acting as your tag. You're not using a key or a code. So therefore, a lock would be the answer. Moving on to question 15. You might be upset to see we're almost done with section A. Which digital security method enables the system administrator to allow users access to different data or software on a system? Okay, antivirus, encryption, permissions, usernames and passwords. Right, antivirus encryption we can pretty much rule out straight away because they're just doing something very specific on a computer. Antivirus is scanning for viruses and removing any. Encryption is making stuff unreadable, so not really relevant. Permissions would be what I would say, but usernames and passwords could be used because you could lock certain things behind a username and password, but the whole point of the permission is to be able to assign different access levels. So one file one user can access, another file they can't, based on permissions. So when it's a toss-up between two, you've got a thing which is most likely to be correct. It is 50-50 after all at that stage, but I would have gone for permissions, which is correct if you're watching this video. So that's section A done. This one was not as bad as I've seen. Do not stress too much about it. 1 or 2 marks is not going to matter overall, especially if section B goes well. OCR do like to put in difficult questions. I've seen stuff here which I didn't know, which is not really fair, but it's just how it goes. So to do well at this section, you need to be really concentrating and don't get too cocky. And if you have revised properly, it won't be guesswork. You'll know these answers if you've put in the legwork beforehand. Okay, moving on to the main event, which is section B. And we start off always with a scenario on some made-up company, which usually carries through to the end of the paper. So it's important you take in this scenario and don't skip it. You've got to read it really carefully, and whenever you can in your answers, refer back to this scenario. And what I'd suggest is when you read it, I would highlight or underline key aspects of the little brief here. So it's called Galen Tyrrell Engine Solutions, GES. Is an engineering company that creates prototype engines for its clients. GES uses computer-aided design, CAD, and computer-aided manufacturing, CAM, in the creation process. So what could be underlined here? Engineering company could be relevant, prototype engines, and CAD and CAM are being used. The company is based on one site with 3 main buildings. That could definitely be relevant. Thinking networking, could be talking about a LAN or possibly even a WAN. Main office is 8 personal computers which are used for office administration. Is that relevant? Yeah, probably 8 is quite a small amount. The design building has got 6 personal computers which are used by the designers for CAD. So different uses of these systems could again be relevant. So one for CAD, one for office admin. And the manufacturing building contains the CAM computers and machinery used by the company engineers. So that's a 3rd office, right? Or 3rd building with, again, different software running. Could be relevant. Let's see. 16A. The CAD designers use a range of input devices to create their designs. Identify and describe 2 input devices that could be used for 4 marks. So 2 ones, obviously 2 marks for each. Identify is just state. Describe is say something about it. So loads of input devices which we could say, things like keyboards, mice, graphics tablets. Microphone is input, but microphone is not really relevant. A scanner is probably not very relevant. I would say keyboard, mouse, graphics tablet are key ones. So let's keep it really simple and just go keyboard and mouse. That's 2 marks, really easy for identify. But now let's describe what they do. So a keyboard could be used to enter information into the software. Could go more detailed and say things like, numbers or letters. The mouse is used to point. Let's put this into proper English. Mouse is used to point and select items in the software. The third one I said was graphics tablet, which is what I'm using right now to badly answer these questions, my bad handwriting. So graphics tablet is used to draw on the screen. Would be really useful for CAD in particular, because you're designing stuff on the screen. Harder to use a mouse than to draw, in theory, if you're not me. Now, part B, GES takes video footage of a prototype engines being manufactured to send to their clients. The USB connections have been disabled on all company PCs. Identify and describe one type of port that could be used to download the video footage from the camera. Again, identify and describe, state, say a little bit about it. And USBs, the main competitor to USB, which is on the course at least, is FireWire, which is not something many of us really come across because USB is so popular, but FireWire is the main equivalent. There are things like SATA and what else did we cover? Ethernet and fiber, but they're not alternatives to USB. FireWire is. So that's one mark just by saying FireWire. Now what can we say about it? Well, really anything which is related. So FireWire, could say, is an alternative. And what's a fact we could say about FireWire? Is an alternative developed by Apple, and the benefit is it can be used to set up a network between the devices, a peer-to-peer network. Now, to be honest, I'm not really sure whether that would really happen between a camera and the computer, but it is a fact which FireWire has, which USB doesn't. So, just looking for any description which is slightly relevant. There's not a ton you can really say about FireWire because it's not used so much. A bit of a tricky question, that one. Moving on though to part C. So the personal computers in the design building have had graphics expansion cards installed. So GPUs have been added. Identify and describe one benefit to the designers of having these graphics expansion cards. As you might know, well, it's on the course, but as you might know generally, adding graphics cards to computers means they increase their power. Gaming PCs have got expensive graphics cards because the GPU can take some of the load off the CPU. So the CPU is doing most of the work, but it can delegate stuff to the GPU to reduce its workload. And we've got another identify and describe question here, and it's one benefit. So let's say the GPU can process graphical tasks instead of the CPU doing it. And so the consequence is this allows the CPU to do other stuff, increasing overall performance. Okay, so I've cleared that I didn't say stuff in the end. I said allows CPU to process other instructions. Not sure why I've put commas here. Wasn't really concentrating, obviously. So you process other instructions unrelated to the graphics. Let the GPU, the specialized card, do the hard work. The CPU can do other stuff. Really here, I've identified my point last and described it first, effectively, but that's fine. It's still worth 2 marks. And part D, designers order 3D printer filaments by communicating with the staff in the main office. Identify and describe one item of communications hardware required to communicate with main office using a tablet PC. Right, so I'm looking at the word filaments here. I don't think that's relevant to the question. I think these are just what the 3D printer uses, maybe the plastic involved. But what hardware is needed for communicating using a tablet PC? That's really important because a tablet generally won't plug in to an Ethernet port, right? An Ethernet port might go into a desktop computer, might go into some laptops, but a tablet is a very portable device, which means it's wireless, using Wi-Fi in particular. So what creates a Wi-Fi signal? Well, the Wi-Fi signal is created by a wireless access point, a WAP for short, wireless access point. Commonly people will say things like router because we associate router with just providing Wi-Fi, but the router itself is not producing the Wi-Fi, it's a wireless access point. Some routers are hybrid routers which have a WAP built in. You probably have one in your house built in, but the actual access point is what's providing this signal. So let's say a wireless access point, which is my identify stage, can be used to connect the tablet through Wi-Fi to the wired main office network. So the key idea is we're going from wireless Wi-Fi to wired is the key idea of a wireless access point. Now there are other hardware you could potentially say. Things like routers and modems are out because this is one network. Presumably it's a LAN. So we wouldn't say routers, modems. You could potentially say hubs and switches, although really the tablet's got to connect somehow to the hub or switch. So really as an alternative, you probably could get away with saying things like Ethernet cables, because most tablets don't have an Ethernet port, but they could, I suppose. But WAP is definitely the best answer in my opinion. Right now, we've got some conversions here. So going from decimal into hexadecimal. Make sure you read that really carefully and make sure you understand the order. Decimal into hexadecimal, because these numbers here could also be hexadecimal, although they are quite big. Right, so 134 putting into hexadecimal for only 1 mark each. These are not worth very much, so make sure you know how to do them and practice ahead of time because you've got to do them quickly. So to put this into hexadecimal, what we need to do is first of all draw our place value table. So always starting with 1 as our far right column, and because hexadecimal has got 16 digits, we are multiplying our columns by 16. And we can keep multiplying until we reach a column which is just smaller than our number. So 16 times 16 is 256, but actually that's bigger than both of our numbers, so I do not need that third column. 1 and 16 is sufficient. Why can't I delete that column? There we go. Kind of better. Right, now the stages, let me just zoom in a little bit. The stages are to look at the far left column and go, how many times does 16 go into 134? Now remember, you are allowed a calculator, so let me not embarrass myself by doing it in my head and use a calculator. So what we're doing here is 134 divided by 16, which is 8.375. We ignore the decimal part and just write down 8. So it goes in 8 times, and we can write it straight. That's annoying. Write it straight under 16. So it goes in 8 times, but we've got a remainder. Now, our remainder is not 0.375, but you can figure out the remainder by going 134, which is our number, minus, and then you're doing 8 times 16. Because 8 times 16 is what we've done here, and subtracting that from our original number finds what was left over when we did the division. Because it wasn't a clean division, we had that remainder, but the decimal number was not our remainder. 6 is our remainder. So what you should do is write down, is write down remainder 6. And now what we do is go, how many times is 1 go into 6? No calculator required, we just write down 6. So 134 is 86 in hexadecimal. Looks like 86, but it's not. It's 86. If you want to be really clear, you could write a mini 16, but you've got to be careful it doesn't look like that's your number. Now to do the same thing again with 244, let me do another table really quickly. 116 again, it's smaller just than 256, so I just need 2 columns. And now, how many times does 16 go into 244? I don't know. Let's try. 244 divided by 16 is 15.25. So again, I would write down 15, except that 15 I can't write down in its pure form like this, because 15 is 2 digits. I've got to convert it. Now one thing I didn't say is hexadecimal is special because 0 to 9 are the same. as decimal, but 10 onwards we have letters. And we go 10 to 15 because 0 to 15 is 16 in total. So 10 is A, 11 is B, C is 12, etc., etc. 15 is F. So I don't write down 15, I write down F instead. Next step is to find my remainder. So again, what you do is get your original number, 244, and subtract, using brackets, 16 times F. F is 15. And this will find what's left over. It's only 4 left over. So what am I doing? Remainder 4. And now 1 goes into 4 times. No need to convert it to a letter. This one is F4, which is quite fitting given it's a shortcut in browsers. Okay, so those are our two answers for hexadecimal. Moving on to 17A, GES, store client, project and finance details for every prototype engine project. Identify which productivity software would be best suited to doing this. Well, out of our options, we've got email, spreadsheets, databases, word processors, and I believe those were 4 we covered. So which would be best for storing client, project and finance details? Well, if you're storing for every project, that's a lot of data. A lot of data lends itself to databases. If you are storing stuff, that's all you're doing pretty much, databases are what you want. Probably could say spreadsheets too, but I really think databases are better. Spreadsheets are good when you're doing some calculations, but it doesn't say calculations here, just says storing. Now part B, the CAM PCs used by the engineers need regular maintenance. The GES IT technician uses utility software during the maintenance. Identify 2 different types that could be used during the maintenance of the CAM PCs. Justify your choices. So justify means say why you chose what you chose. Why would it be relevant to the IT technician? How is it going to help them? Well, there are 3 ones on my specification. We've got backup. I don't know why I'm writing it here. Let's not write it there. We've got backup. We have got compression. And we've got, let me think, we've got antivirus. We also looked at defragmentation briefly in a troubleshooting video, which is also technically utility software. So I wrote these 2 in first. Let's talk about those 2. How could backup software be useful? Well, backup software can be used to copy important information. Justification, it can copy important information to reduce the risk of it being lost in the future. Now, that might not seem too relevant to this technician, but the technician is maintaining stuff. Maintenance is about making sure things keep working as time goes on, and clearly if you're not backing up, if something does go wrong, that information is lost, and so it ensures the information is kept longer term. Now compression, what compression does is shrink down file sizes by being a bit clever about how it rearranges stuff. Some compression just deletes parts of your file, other compression is more clever and just rearranges it. You end up with smaller file sizes. Justify compression software will reduce file sizes to, let's say, free up more capacity on the storage. And we could probably say why, just to be on the safe side. The examiner might think, well, that's not really enough. Why is that good? So more files can be stored in the future. Okay, and that was a 6 marker. Actually, I completely missed that. One thing you should do, which I didn't do, which I'm now just realising, is always look to see how many marks it's worth. I assumed this was 2 marks each, but it's not. It's 3 marks for each of our ones. Now I'm thinking, did I write enough? So I think if I was an examiner, which I have been, what would I be doing? Well, I'm thinking this first point, we'll reduce file sizes to free up more capacity. I'd give that a mark personally. And my second mark or third mark for this point would be saying why. So you can store more files in the future. Now, regarding my backup, have I written enough to get 2 marks for this justification? It can copy important information to reduce the risk of it being lost in the future. Yeah, I think that's enough. You could always add more, but I think you've said the first point is important information, second point is reducing a risk. Okay, now going on to part C. One of the CAM PCs keeps unexpectedly rebooting. Identify and describe 2 troubleshooting tools that could be used to locate the issue. For 4 marks. I'm now looking at that straight away. Well, the exam board give 3 ones you've got to know, which are logs, baselines, and installable tools. So we can say 2 of those 3. There are more. I mentioned things like post. I mentioned things like event viewer in my videos. Post will beep a certain number of times to give you a clue as to what the issue is. Event viewer shows lots of past errors. A log, really. So let's say log first of all. A log, we said right at the start that a log is used to document, to record errors. So a log could be used, so let's say a log documents errors or records errors. So what could the person do? The person could look at the log and look to see what has been going wrong and when. So I could say it could be inspected to determine when and what the error was. And if you're thinking about how you would determine this, right, the log is usually a very, very, very long window on your computer with loads and loads and loads of like lines of just recording what's going on. So what you could do is when it's crashed, you could restart and go back and see what was happening just before, what went on just before it rebooted. So let me say that. Just before it rebooted. Rebooting is when it will just turn off and turn back on again without you wanting it to. Well, if it's unexpected, I mean. Rebooting is a normal thing. Okay, so that'll give it 2 marks. Let's just double check it makes sense. Expect to determine when and what the error was just before it rebooted. Yeah, that's fine. Now, the second tool I said, let's do baselines. It was in one of our multiple choice questions. So just because it comes up in section A doesn't mean it won't come up in section B. Don't get put off writing the same thing twice, it might feel like. And what you could even do, if you're cocky and confident with your answer from before, you could lift the definition straight across. So where were baselines? Lost it now. Right, so baselines test computer performance against an established norm. So we can use that phrase, established norm. Baselines could be used to compare the computer now against established norms. And why would that be useful? Just to be really, really clear about our answer, would it be useful to see what's changed? Like, what has changed? Is it a particular component not performing as well? Is it a particular application not performing as well? You've got that comparison. You know, if you check your baseline and see that your CPU is suddenly performing at half capacity, that might be a sign that your OS is not really working, or the CPU itself might not be working properly. So baselines are useful for that purpose. The third tool covered on the spec are installable tools, which by definition is a very, very general category. An installable tool is just a very specific tool for a particular problem. And so as a category, that contains hundreds of separate tools. So you could say this to, target a particular component. You might install a tool for your graphics card or for your CPU just to test that particular component. These are individually more specific to each component or each bit of software. Moving on to 18A. So the GES main office currently has one server. This server is used for storing client and prototype engine design project data, sending, receiving and archiving emails, hosting the GES website, connecting to shared printers. So pretty typical server stuff. it has been recommended that 3 servers are installed to maintain the functionality. Identify and explain 3 types of server that could be installed. So in terms of our list of servers, let's have a think. We've got file servers, we've got print servers, we've got email servers, we've got hypervisors, application, database, and web. So out of those ones, which ones do we think are going to apply here? Let's just double check how many marks. It's got to be 9 marks. Wow. Okay, so 3 types of server. Thinking exam technique, worth 9 marks. 9 divided by 3 is 3. So we're looking for 3 points per server. So identify what the server is and explain why it could be installed. So let's have a look at these bullet points. First one I'm reading again is this third one. Hosting the GS website would be a web server. So we can mention that. Shared printers, well, that's going to be a print server. Sending, receiving, archive emails is going to be a mail server. And the top one, so storing client and prototype engine design project data, is just a file server, right? Those are files, be a file server. So it's given us, I was wondering when I was reading it why it's telling us this stuff, but it's giving us clues as to what to write about. Now, hypervisor, we possibly could mention, but it's nothing here is giving a clue that we are needing a hypervisor. Hypervisors for virtualization. So these ones are quite obvious based on what it said. Let's just go over the first 3. So file, mail, and web, just because that's the order. So first of all, a file server could be installed, and then I need to explain it. So that's my identify point. Let's explain it now. Could be installed to store. Well, what's it going to store? It's going to store the client and prototype design data. And we could even just, a bit overkill perhaps, but even just say stuff like so employees can access it. Not a ton more we could say. It's good to always try and link in the scenario as best you can. It's not always super easy. I mean, you can say more things about it being centralized and you can back it up and all that sort of stuff, but I think that's enough for 3 marks. Second server I said was a mail server, and it's sort of given us the answer here really. It said sending, receiving, archiving emails, which is exactly what a mail server does. So I don't see how we can't use that, or why we shouldn't use that. So what did it say? I've just completely forgotten. Send, receive, and archive emails. Struggling to see how much more we could say really. That's the key essence, right? It's managing the emails for us. We could also say things like it might be running POP and SMTP. It may run POP. So POP is a protocol to receive email. SMTP is a protocol to send email. Personally, if I was in a real exam, I'd be screaming to myself, you know, is that 3 marks to get all that space? But it is hard to write. It's hard to think of more stuff for a mail server. That's essentially its essence, what it does. Again, you can mention backups. You could mention security. You know, a mail server could have a spam filter, which would apply to everybody. But there's only so much you can write. Don't write for the sake of it. It's okay to leave some space. And the third one I said was a web server. So a web server hosts the website, again, as it said in the question. Quite a generous one, this one. Now we could perhaps say what that means to host a website. So if you host a website, it means it stores it and allows clients to access it and receive it. So, you know, the way this works is in a client-server network, the client requests a web page, in this case, from a web server. The web server provides it to the client. That's the way that relationship works. And again, could, you know, try and drag in more points. And if I was finished early with my exam, I would definitely come back and add stuff to questions like this. But in your first run through, that is more than sufficient. So print server, I didn't write about it, but we could have done. The print server, actually, to be fair here, is a bit less helpful about what it's given us. The print server is used to maintain queues. You might have lots of people printing at once. Also, because we've got shared printers, you're able to usually print from multiple locations. You might go to any printer in your building and be able to print it remotely. That's a big benefit. And generally it gives you more central control having an actual print server instead of going directly to printers. Okay, so let's move on, shall we? to part B, which is our first 10 mark and also our first quality of written communication question. And that asterisk, you've got to be on the lookout for it because it's not that obvious. It's very easy to miss it. Other exam boards really scream at you and give you warnings. This is very subtle. Okay, so be looking out for it. 10 markers are almost always got an asterisk as well. So the GS business is expanding with an increased number of clients. An IT consultant has recommended that cloud storage is used to archive completed engine design projects. Using examples related to GES, explain the benefits and limitations of using cloud storage to archive completed engine design projects rather than updating their current hardware. Right, so cloud storage, all about this question, and benefit and limitations, so good stuff, bad stuff. And the idea is, they could just update their current hardware, presumably to get maybe bigger storage or get better storage, but why are they not going to do that? And importantly, using examples related to GS, we can't just talk generally about cloud storage, good and bad, you've got to relate it to this company. Now, the way we approach 10 markers is a bit different to other questions. With other questions, the way the examiner marks it is the examiner will be sat on my computer with a mark scheme, and we'll go through and hopefully tick off the marks as you go. They're looking for, say, 3 points for a 3-mark question. A 10 mark is not that simple. They don't tick off each point. You haven't got to make 10 points to get 10 marks. Instead, it's your overall answer which is important. But I think exam technique, if it's worth 10 marks, I would say it's worth making, trying to say, maybe not quite doing it, but trying to do 3 positives, 3 negatives would be my strategy. And the idea being each one, if you explain each one, that gives you, well, roughly 12 marks worth. So more than you need, although, like I say, this is not quite how it's marked, but it's how I would approach it. And then we can make sure it's nice and linked, because this star is all about the quality of your written communication. The other questions so far, you could have answered in bullet points. Your English could have been a bit kind of lazy or informal, but this question is really important, it's really clear and really logical, which means your points link together, they're not jumping around. And that's really hard to start a question and suddenly have it really logical. So what I would do and what I'd recommend you do is make a plan before you get going. So the first thing I'm thinking of is, what can we say that's going to link to this business? Well, I can remember way back in the scenario we highlighted the fact that there are 3 buildings, which is not ideal, right? You've got people separated, and presumably each office wants to access the same files, and to having it stored physically means maybe they can't access it as easily. If it was in the cloud, presumably they can access it much more conveniently, no matter where they are. So that could be a nice benefit to start off with. And my little plan I might try and do away. Make sure your plan is away from your answer. You can do it like up at the top. The examiner won't mark stuff at the top, so you can always do it out of place, or just here. So benefit, let me start us off quickly and say remote access. I need to develop that a little bit. What about limitation? What could be a problem with this? Well, problem could be, this could be quite sensitive. This could be very commercially sensitive. And so could there be a security issue maybe? Could you worry about maybe it being stored somewhere else? And that could be a concern to the company. It does say in this question actually that they are dealing with they've got an increased number of clients. So because they're increasing, a benefit of cloud storage is it's very easy to increase your capacity. All you do is pay Google or pay Microsoft or pay Apple more money, and you can increase it really easily. To increase your own hardware, you've got to install a new hard drive or a new SSD. A bit more difficult. So let's do another pro as being the expandability. So it's expandable or scalable is a proper word. Another negative which could link to this could be kind of ongoing cost. If you are buying your own hardware, that's a one-time cost. but this is every month, the billing. And let's try and find another one to include. What else can we say which is relevant? So maybe we don't even do another benefit. I mean, there are more benefits, of course, but let's just focus on limitations for now. We could say something like, you're also reliant on there being internet. You've got to have internet for this to work. Okay, so in terms of our linking, let's start by doing remote access, and then let's turn that into the security issue. And we could talk about uptime, downtime. And then let's go back to being expandable as our third point, and then let's go into the cost, and let's finally end with the internet can become kind of like our second point as well. Now, that took me a couple of minutes to explain. In a real exam, you do that hopefully much quicker, like bam, 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 these are my ideas, how am I going to link it? Then you can get going. If this question takes you 12 minutes or 13 minutes, that's fine, it's worth the investment. Okay, so starting off, remote access, the idea that they can access it from either site. So I've said that, they've currently got 3 sites, but if they were going to increase it, which the question kind of suggests, it might become harder to access. If you've got one file server stored on your LAN, if you get a new office across town, suddenly you've got to use the internet to access it, which is not as ideal. So instead, the cloud storage, could be accessed from anywhere, no matter which office they're in. So let me actually say from any office, even outside of the LAN. So the LAN is the local area network. It's always good to throw in some technical terms. That's quite important to get the top marks for these questions. Well, why is this good? Well, this offers flexibility and may increase productivity. Why? Well, if the files are easily accessible. But now let's link into a negative point. We could say, however, let's go to our internet point actually. It makes more sense to bring it in now, because if you're working remotely and connecting through the cloud, you need internet. If you haven't got internet, it's not going to work. So let's say that. However, you need internet to connect. And to try and link it to the scenario, let me say something like, which may be a problem if one of the engineers is visiting a client and hasn't got mobile internet. And we could even put 2 negative points back to back and say, including this, or no, in addition to this, because these might be quite sensitive information, they're quite important to the company, the phrase I want to use is commercially sensitive. That means it's really important. There might be a concern that storing it in an off-site location has more security risks. So what I've said is, in addition to this, having such important and commercially sensitive files on a remote server they have no control over may make them concerned about the amount of security in place. Although you could even flip this and say something like, a large cloud provider likely has a big budget for security. So what else did I want to say? Expandable, let's say that. It's hard to link it here, so we could just make a new little paragraph. That's not really a problem. So upgrading capacity in individual devices can be time consuming and costly, whereas cloud storage is very easily scalable. Now, scalable is a technical term, so it's best if I define what this is. It does say explain, so we've got to explain this. So scalable is the idea that you are able to increase capacity or decrease capacity very quickly by just upgrading your plan. So let me say, just by upgrading your plan, you can have access to more capacity. And just to finish off, we have got a bit more space. And by the way, if you run out of space at all, there is usually some additional space provided, so you can write more questions here if you need to, more answers there if you need to. I don't think we will here though. We've got quite a few points already. Let me just end by saying about the cost. So if you are upgrading yourself, that's a one-off cost, but cloud storage is a rolling cost. You are constantly paying to keep up the service. So finally end by saying however, which is a great word to link your points together. However, upgrading local storage, that's what's on your computer right now. is a one-off cost, which means you pay it once and then you're done. Right, if you buy a hard drive, that's it. Whereas cloud storage is billed every month. So we could say it's a longer term, maybe more expensive. Now, you could definitely add more points, but again, it's about being sensible and seeing how you're doing. If you feel like you're running behind on time, there's no point adding more points in this. We've got enough. I know I said at the start to have 3 positive, 3 negative, which I haven't quite done. I've sort of done 2 positive and 3 negative, which again is fine because it's marked generally. Hopefully an examiner would feel this is a generally well explained answer, which flows hopefully quite well together. Not going to win any awards, but answers in exams never will. What is important now though is to read through and check it makes sense. So I'm going to do this too because I'm not perfect. I make mistakes all the time. Let's have a little read. Yeah, so I spotted a mistake. So I said, if one of the engineers, if visiting a client, which makes no sense. That's what I would do. Cross out the F and put in an S, is visiting a client. So that might cost you, probably not, but it could cost you a mark. You never know. One thing I would say is 10 markers, people get put off. Now this was, I think, a relatively easy one. If it's on a harder topic, it can be very off-putting. Generally, the mark scheme is quite generous for 10 markers. If your answer is relatively coherent and you've tried to put in technical terms, even if you're not quite right, we haven't quite understood, you could get 5 marks or 6 marks. Even if you get 4 marks, much better than getting no marks. No question should ever be left blank. You've got to try the question, especially 10 markers. That could ruin your chance of getting a distinction if you don't even try these or don't really try. And that's, I think, motivation to revise. If you've got a 10 marker on something you haven't bothered to revise, that'll be a nightmare. So please revise everything if you have got time. Now, thankfully, a blessedly 1 mark question here. So main office, design, building and manufacturing. Oh no, hang on, let's read this properly. Main office, design building and manufacturing building are connected in a network using Ethernet cable and hubs. Identify the type of network. Well, if it is a hub, all a hub does is just repeat messages out to all the devices. And we've got a few different types of networks. We've got LANs and WANs, we've got client server, peer-to-peer, we've got, wired wireless. But here, it's not, we haven't got much to go on. So it's going to be LAN, WAN or MAN. So which one is it going to be? Well, a WAN is against multiple networks and a MAN is across a kind of city. And because a hub is only across one network, this must be a LAN. If it had a router in it, it would be a WAN or a MAN potentially, but it hasn't, so it must be a LAN. Now, if you wrote client server or peer-to-peer, that would be wrong because it's not telling us how it's working. We haven't got enough information to know if it was client server or peer-to-peer, unfortunately. Now, 19A, we've got a 4 marker. A weekly meeting is held with the managers, designers and engineers. The meeting is held in the design building as there are barriers to communication in the manufacturing building. I wonder what that could be. Identify and describe 2 possible barriers to communication in the manufacturing building. Well, it's got to be loud, surely. If you're manufacturing stuff, that means you're making things, and so the building is going to be loud, I would suspect. So that's definitely one thing we could say. If it's loud, that means you can't hear people, it means it's difficult, you get headaches and that sort of thing. So let's say, as products are being made, it could be loud. That's me identifying it. Well, so employees may not be able to hear each other. The other kind of barriers mentioned on the specification are things like distraction. That's very similar, right? If it's loud, that's distracting, but we can make it into 2 points here. An active factory, which is kind of what it is, I suppose, will have a lot going on, which could be distracting. And to describe it, just making it harder to work. Now for part B, GES uses bespoke software during the design process. The bespoke software needs updating. Identify the job role which would carry out this task. So the job roles we covered were IT technician, network manager, animator, web designer and programmer. Now normally, if software is being updated, you need somebody to go in and actually update it and install it and download the software and install it. That's the process, which would be probably an IT technician, but it does say bespoke. Now, bespoke software is made specifically for the company. It's not available anywhere else. GES have paid someone to develop this software, and so you need to update it manually by developing it a bit more. And who would do this? Well, a programmer is the person writing code, the person who would create the bespoke software. So you might think IT technician, but actually this is a programmer because it's bespoke. For general software, it'd probably be an IT technician, assuming it's already been made, but it hasn't, so it's got to be programmed. Now for Part C, GES have decided to employ a new member of staff to update and maintain the software used in all departments, probably a programmer. And the new staff member should be a member of a professional body. Identify and explain one benefit of being a member of a professional body for 3 marks. So 1 mark for identify as always, and then now 2 for explain. So a professional body is an organisation designed to support your progress as a professional. So they can help train you. That could be one benefit. And we have got to be careful because if we say more than one benefit, we won't get more marks. You've got to only say 1. So we've got training, we've also got things like networking, like you meet more people. We've also got like, they might make newsletters and things like that. I think training is the strongest if you want to be safe. So the benefit is the employee may benefit from training, which, well, why is that good? Which could improve their knowledge and make them a more effective employee for GES. In fact, I say that it's not saying why is it a benefit to that person, it's saying generally. So let's just say generally, improve their knowledge and make them more effective at their job. And we also covered industry certification, which is sort of the qualification you get in the same way that hopefully you end up with a CTEC diploma or certificate. When you get certified, you get a qualification from doing training. So you could say, this may lead to certification, which is valued by other employers. Now what that means is effectively, if you've got a certificate on your CV, that looks good to other employers. So you get maybe job offers and stuff like that. And you could say that, but I'm not going to. Moving on to Part D, the new staff member should have industry certification. I did not read that at all. I should have read that before writing that last point, but it doesn't matter. I mean, they're separate questions. Both are valid. Identify and describe one benefit to GES of a new staff member having industry certification. Fine. Okay, so let's just say what I just said. Well, in fact, what is benefit? Well, it's valued by other employers, but we can say why. In fact, no, it's not other employers, it's GES. Got to read the question really, really carefully. I almost didn't. So, GES can be more confident that they are able to perform their job properly. Let's say actually effectively and not properly. It's a bit better. And to guarantee we get the 2 marks, we could say something like, so they don't need to provide their own training. Okay, and another 10 marker, lovely. So GES need to maintain the confidentiality of their prototype engine designs. That means the secretness, how secret they are. They're obviously quite valuable. The current designs are stored on a physical server with the archived design stored on the cloud. Discuss the security measures that could be used to protect the engine design stored on both the physical server and the cloud. So what are some security measures we could talk about in this case? Again, another asterisk question. You've got to make sure this is very logical. So let's do another plan again. Right, so there's not a lot of space here to do our little plans. Again, like I said earlier, make sure your plans are not in the place where the examiner is going to mark it. It's got to be away somewhere. So let's do it in the margins. And you've sort of got to read between the lines here a little bit. It does say both the physical server and the cloud. Now, if you know the specification well, and you've watched my videos, you know there are kind of 2 areas to this. We've got physical security and we've got digital security. Now, the whole point of the cloud is it's away from you. You can't control the physical security of the cloud. So you can make sure your physical security is really strong, you can add locks, you can add security guards, CCTV, etc., etc. on your own end. You cannot control that with the cloud. So I think we should try and distinguish between physical and cloud, or in particular physical and digital. So in terms of physical stuff, like I say, making sure things are locked, making sure you've got security personnel around, and let's do another one as well. So for servers, we could make sure, well, we could say biometrics could get used. So we could use biometrics to access the server room, for example. And for the cloud side, the digital side, what else could we say? Well, things like encryption. Make sure we encrypt our files. We have got control over that. You could use a firewall to filter what's coming in and out. And you could use a antivirus. Actually, antivirus could be at both ends. It's not physical, but it could be used on both the server locally and on the cloud. And again, 10 marks, like, it's not as simple as making 10 points or 5 points explained. But if I talk about 6 things and discuss it a little bit, discuss means you sort of talk about it a bit. How can it be used? What's it there for? 6, like roughly 2 marks each, is more than enough. So let's see how we go. The order here is not quite as important, I would say. Oh, no, that's not quite true. What order could we say? I think let's start off with the physical stuff. So these 3 are going to be first. Then we can kind of connect up to antivirus maybe, because it can be on both locally and, but you know, encryption can be both locally and on the cloud. Anyway, let's go to antivirus after our physical ones. So let's say for the physical security, for the physical server, GS can ensure the server room is kept locked at all times. Why? Well, because an attacker may try and gain access to it. So I could say security staff could be used to patrol areas around the server room. And it's also mentioned biometric. So a biometric is something like a fingerprint, your iris, something to do with your body, which can be used as a password basically. So let's say, and biometrics can be used to gain access to the server room. Give an example, such as fingerprints could be required to gain access to the server room. On a side note, my handwriting is getting worse because I'm getting tired, and that's how exams go, right? You get to this point where we're so close to being done and your hand is really hurting. You've been writing so hard. You've got to really try and do your best to keep it as neat as possible. I know I'm setting a bad example, but you've got to bear in mind the examiner is not getting paid very much to mark your paper, usually only a few pounds. They're not going to spend a long time trying to understand your writing if it's really messy, so please try and keep it relatively readable where you can. So let's say why quickly. Discuss as always about kind of saying as much as you can about it. So why biometrics good? These are hard to forge and can't be shared like passwords. I can share a password with an attacker, but I can't share my fingerprint or my eye or whatever is being used. And forging is about faking. Like, you can't fake an eye or a fingerprint, or you can't fake it easily, at least we can say. Now that's all about our physical server, but let's now transition into antivirus. By the way, my colours, I'm changing colours when I make a new point, so hopefully we'll see 6 points at the end, but let's see. So let's say on both the physical server and, if possible, like, you might not be able to put it on the cloud server. So I've said antivirus could be installed to scan for and remove any malware. And why is that important? Well, the malware, like a virus, could delete the files. In fact, what they called again, prototypes. So the designs could get deleted by the virus. in that case, it's better saying designs than files, because saying designs means you have been, listening to what they've said in the question. Okay, now let's say about encryption. Why not? Because again, that can be on both. The firewall isn't really on either. The firewall kind of sits between the two, that kind of a border of your network. So let's now go into encryption, and let's say let's get another colour. Let's say in case something like spyware could be used to gain access to your computer. Likewise, a hacker could gain access to it and look at your files. So let's say the designs could be compromised if a hacker gained access or if there was spyware on the computer. Compromise means it's been found, like the hacker's seeing your designs. So to avoid this, the files could be encrypted, or the designs could be encrypted. Why will this help? Well, to ensure nobody but GES employees can view the actual files. And that's because only they have what we call the decryption key. Okay, and I mentioned firewalls. We can say that, look, we may have enough points here. Now, probably we don't actually. We probably have enough points for maybe 7 or 8, maybe 9 on a good day. But let's make sure by talking about firewalls as a final point. So a firewall is different because a firewall, like we've got our LAN and we've got the cloud network, which is massive, right? And we've got our kind of router sat on the edge. A firewall is like right on the edge of our network, and so anything connecting between the two has got to go through the firewall. Anything dodgy will hopefully get filtered out, so it won't reach our network. Only valid traffic should go into our network is the idea. So a firewall, we can say, and to use a fancy phrase, so it can sit at the network perimeter. So the perimeter is the outer edge, and what it does is filter traffic to block any suspicious messages. And why would this be a good thing? Well, for your physical server, this can block any illegitimate access. But also, we could say another kind of nice point to end on, which sounds quite technical, is, but also, if you had, say, malware in your actual network, if we had a virus in our actual network, this could spread to the cloud server unless a firewall blocked it, because a firewall will check stuff being sent as well as received, and also reduce the risk of any malware spreading from GS's network to the cloud storage. Okay, well, my hand is hurting a lot. Hopefully that writing was relatively readable. Again, at this point, you should definitely be going back through and reading through what you wrote to make sure it makes sense and there aren't any typos or things like that. Not typos, mistakes. So I found another mistake. Shared like password singular, like passwords, that should be. Right, so I read it through, and apart from that mistake, I think it's all okay. Not perfect, but it's all okay. Let's see how many points I made of my colours. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. More than enough, I'm sure. You don't need to write 12 points to get 10 marks. It's more about the quality. I could have sacrificed 1 or 2 points to be more, to explain it more. Really, you're cool. But it's always better to write more than less, as long as it makes sense. Don't waffle. Try and keep things specific. It's better to only make, say, 4 points that are really clear than 10 points which are waffling. So quality over quantity for sure, with 10 markers at least. And the very final question, isn't that a nice feeling? Well, it depends if you're in a panic or not. Identify 2 direct threats to the security of GES client personal data held on a server in the main office. So, not security methods like we went through, but now what are some threats to them? Well, we went through things like phishing, we went through things like hacking and social engineering and Trojans and so on. In terms of the client personal data, things like phishing, does that really apply? It's not really a direct threat. So what's going to affect that data directly? Well, hacking, I would say a hacker could definitely want to go and get that data. That's a direct threat. The hacker will go direct to that server. But also, let's say a virus, because a virus will again go and get the data. It's not a human doing it this time, it's a program, but it's not via something else. A phishing email could lead to there being a virus, but it's not direct. Could also have said things like data theft and Trojans and not so much spyware, because spyware is spying on the person. It's not a direct threat. It's not doing something directly to it. Whereas hacking, viruses, Trojans, data theft, interception, you could say, all are. So that's it. Hopefully in the real exam you'd have some time now to go back over your answers. If you are concerned about running out of time, do some more practice, because that's really important. If you use this additional space, make sure it is really clear, as it said, what question it is. That's important. I also think what you should do is, if you do use this space, make sure where you wrote the question you do a little note to the examiner saying, please look at the additional answer space, just in case they mark you wrong when actually you've written it somewhere else. Now, like I say, go back over and check. Ideally you can read through every single answer. If some are blank, guess. If some are quite brief, add to it, again, guess. With questions which are not 10 markers, you can just add other stuff to it without damaging your chances. 10 markers should be quite quality over quantity. But other questions, you can be a bit more, you can write more. Apart from if it says one, like one type or two types, you can't add a third type or a second type. It's got to be what it says. So apart from that, hopefully this was useful. If it was, please let me know. And I really hope your exam goes well. Best of luck.